Hey everyone, and welcome to what is the big idea for week 6. So we are moving right along in the class, and this week we are heading into. Oops, sorry, we're heading into the third book of the class that we're going to be reading. So if you remember the kind of the way that this went, we read the leadership book and that the called leadership, and that really taught us that was mostly the vocabulary that we were going to utilize. And then we went and we read the Greenleaf Servant Leadership. We read Authentic Leadership. We've read some other stuff on adaptive leadership and emotional intelligence and things like that. Now we bring in the leadership challenge. So Kutsis and Posner, who wrote this book, are really big followers of servant leadership. So they wrote this book with servant leadership in mind. So you're going to see a lot of the kind of the concepts that we talk about in this book. You'll be able to relate back to stuff that we've already done, which is great. This is how we're starting to pull it through. So what this is the pull through of the class. So again, in the beginning, we were teaching concepts, we we're teaching vocabulary. Now we're starting to set up and say, okay, how can we utilize this in our everyday lives? How can we utilize this when we become a leader? So we're starting to build our toolkit. So again, we're going to do that, and the ways that they've done it, they've broken it up into 5 different kind of things that you can kind of work on. And the first one's called Model the Way. Then it's Inspire Shared Vision, Challenge the Process, Enable Others to Act, and Encourage the Heart. So again, going through this, what I would hope is that you pick out 1 or 2 things from each one of these little chapters, these sections of the book that you can put together, and it can be part of your leadership style. Kind of what you want to be as a leader. And that's really where we're going. So the first one that we get into this time is called Model the Way. Right? So modeling the way our behaviors win respect, modeling the behaviors that you expect from others, clear about your own guiding principles, giving a voice to the value. People first people first follow the person, and then they follow the plan. If you remember that, if you go back to one of the early TED Talks that we listened to with Simon Sinek, and he talks about the golden circle, and one of the things he used to say is people follow why you do things, not what you do. Right? So here again, that concept comes back in. So Simon Sinek, also part of this belief that, kind of clarifying, kind of your authentic leadership style. It all kind of comes back around. So when you look at Model the Way, they break it down even more into clarifying values and then setting the example. So if you think about clarifying values, this is what we've been doing, right? So with your authentic leadership um, project that you did, you actually had to go back and you had to figure out what your values are. You had to think through, why are these my values, and then you had to put them in order, and you had to think about, would I ever compromise them, or why would I not compromise them? That's where we're leading to, because now as we start getting into the how am I going to lead, right? So we did we kind of did the why, the what, and now the how. We're getting into that. So setting personal examples from what you expect from others, right? So, really kind of thinking through, never asking somebody to do something that you wouldn't be willing to do yourself. And that's a big thing. So, show people, model that to them. So again, in sales, there's a lot of times where I'm modeling a sales discussion, or I'm taking on, I'll say to one of my representatives when we're in an account or we're going to be in a meeting, do you want me to do this one, to show you how it is? So remember, if we go back to the kind of the model that I use for the situational leadership that I use for coaching, if you think about that, that's kind of that first, either directive or coaching. And then as time goes on, as they feel more comfortable, I'm letting them take over control of it. But again, being able to have that back and forth. We've been doing some work on my team, getting deeper knowledge into certain disease states. Well, I had to go out there and make sure that I was an expert in those disease states well before I ever gave them the kind of the stuff that I wanted them to learn, because I wanted to be able to talk it. So I make sure that I'm able to use the vocabulary. I'm able to understand the ideas before I even ask them to be able to do it. So it's the same thing. Doesn't matter what you're doing. You're doing accounting. It doesn't matter. You want to make sure that you can do it, or have a good understanding of it, right? Or at least understand the concept behind it. You might not be the expert, because again, remember, when we go back to that original pyramid that I was showing you, is as you go up the line, the less the technical skills you have, but the concepts, the planning, the foresight, that's what you need to have. to be able to help people. So making certain that people adhere to the principles and standards that they have been agreed upon, big thing. So one of the things that I like to do with my team is I like to at the beginning of the fiscal year is talk through my vision and my goal for the end of the year. This is where I want to be. And then I kind of work with my team to say, okay, this is how we're going to get there. So this is where we need to get to. How are we going to get there? And I let them set those principles and standards and say, this is how we're going to do it. These are the sort of things that we're going to do. And if I see us get off course, then it's making sure that we get back to this. So we just had a great example. Yesterday, we're on a Zoom call, and we're talking through something. And I saw a lot of confusion. Like they were asking, oh, is this what you want us to do now? Do you want us to stop doing what we're doing? Do you want us to do this now? I had to stop the call and say, no, what I'm doing is showing you the way somebody else is doing it. I'm not saying they're right or they're wrong, but this is what they're doing. I'm just giving you other examples. Can we take something what they're doing and can we bring that in to what we're doing? So that's just one of those things. So follow through. We're going to get back to follow through because that's a very important thing. Asking for feedback. So you've heard me say this before. Feedback is very important on how you do stuff. Getting feedback from people around you is super, super important. Again, above you, below you, however you can do it. Getting that 360 degree of feedback. And again, the last class, you watch a feedback session that I had with one of my representatives, them giving me feedback. I think it's an important sort of thing for us to go through. Build consensus around a common set of values for running your organization or your team or whatever group. I think I've told the story before, when they asked about how are you going to do this? And I said, I'm going to build a team that we're going to have a common set of values and people are going to, want to be on this team because of them, right? That's going to be a competitive advantage versus other teams is people are going to want to be around us because of the values of how we run our team. And again, for me, it's always a team. The team makes I give the vision, I give them how they do it, they run their business. And be clear about your philosophy of leadership. Remember I told you the question I got where somebody said to me, what is your definition of leadership? And I stammered through it. And I was like, you know what? I can't. I've got to be able to identify it. Even when I talk about, kind of vision, I like to use vision a lot. And I talk about vision in this class, right? So if this is the only leadership class you take, I'm hoping that you take some things that you'll be a better leader because of it. If you take all the other leadership classes or a couple other leadership classes at PC, you're going to be well prepared for those. That's the vision that I set every time when I'm picking out something for us to watch, or if I'm picking out something for us to listen to, or something that I want to bring up from the book. It's always with that in mind. Is there, meeting those two visions? That's my clear, that's my philosophy of leadership of this class. My philosophy of leadership for my team is, again, I'm going to set the vision and the direction. I'm going to give them examples from what other people are doing, and I want them to build their own plans, which is something that we're in now. We're in the business planning section because of the kind of the work stoppage because of the pandemic. They've had a lot of time. I need to get them moving again. So we're building business plans. That's what I want them to do for when things start to get back to normal. They have it. So again, I'm setting the example. I'm giving them, hey, this is what I think it's going to be. This is when I think this is going to be. This is how I think it's going to be. This is what I'm hearing. I'm hearing Rhode Island's opening up. I'm hearing Massachusetts is opening up. I'm pushing my team that way. And it's funny because you can see it. The results just in those last kind of performance period that we measure, my team doing really well. New York teams a little bit lower down. Philly teams down. Those guys aren't moving on yet. So my team are thinking about that moving on. How can we move on? How can we move on better? So just kind of some things to think, modeling those ways, clarifying the values, setting the example, being the person up front. So I wanted to get back to one of the things that was in here is follow through on promises and commitments. One of the biggest drawbacks that leaders have is, and I'm sure you've been into with these leaders who they never follow through with anything, right? So there was a book called Getting It Done by this David Allen, and one of the things that he stresses, so this is the thing, so here's the thing, with all these books and videos and podcasts and stuff that we listen to, you're never going to remember all of it, right? That's impossible. My hope is that you take, again, a thing here, a piece there, and it helps to build your leadership philosophy and ability, even the, kind of the modeling way. How are you going to model it? Stuff like that, all that goes into it. So whenever I read a book, when I finish it, especially a business type book, I sit there and say, okay, what are the one or two things that I can take from this book? And, something that I can either utilize, or it's can help back up something that I already believe in. And I think that's a good way of doing it. So in his book, he has this thing called the 2-minute rule. And it's called, if you can get something done in 2 minutes or less, just do it now. Don't put it off. So it's been something that I've been doing. I actually have it taped up right next to my computer right over here in my handwriting. And it's one of those things for me to think about. And so again, I have it taped on my work computer so that every time something comes in, so as a manager, as a leader, you're getting hit with tasks all the time. And it's like, you can either put them on a to-do list, things to do today, or, let's put them A, B, or C. Let's put them A1, 1A, 1B, kind of, you can break all that down. But what I found is that if I take the ones out of the process that are the 2 minutes or less, I get things done a lot faster. So it's just one of those things that I've been doing. I've been trying to do. It's helped me just over the last period of time as I've been doing this, is how much quicker I can get things done and how much quicker I can get to the things I want to do, right? The strategy, the building stuff. I'm building on how do we build these business plans in this pandemic environment. But in the meantime, as we're sitting here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 emails have come in. Some of those are going to just require yes or no and approval, right? Yep, approve this, don't approve that. This is something I can look at later. Oh, here's a slide deck that came in from another, regional manager in California, because I'd asked him a question. Hey, how are you doing something with telemed? So he sends me his slide deck for his team. Well, that's going to take more than 2 minutes for me to go through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just sit back and I'm going to wait, and I'm going to say that's something that I can do when I have the time. But the ones approving an expense report, that takes 2 minutes. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to do that, bang, bang, bang. I'm going to get them done. And so again, just something that works for me. But the bigger thing that I want to push on is, as you listen to these books and as you read these books, listen to the podcast, watching the videos, whatever, going to seminars, seminar that we'll talk about down the road. I was planning for something else. I put over here, you're going to take 1 or 2 things out of it, and you can say, all right, I can do something better with that. So I also asked you to watch Shawn Achors, and he's written a couple of books. And okay, so here's the reason why he's in with this group. So him and Amy Cuddy, who's the other video that you're going to watch, and we'll talk about her in a little bit. They're, again, they are very authentic servant leadership principle sort of things. And what you're going to do is, again, something that you can take from it, and it's a way of modeling, right? So this goes in with that modeling the way. So Shawn Achors is a positive psychologist. Again, we'll talk about that in a second. But his whole thing is that there's an advantage to happy, positive thinkers and positive people on your team and in the workplace. And he carries it along, again, with his other book called Big Potential. So again, these are just some quotes that came up. So I was given this book by an area director. We were doing some change management with his team, and he was trying to find a way to inspire his team a little bit better. So he handed me this book, and he said, hey, can you lead some sessions? I didn't take all the slides and go through it. I'm not going to break down the book like I did for them, but we did it as a book club. So, they would read a couple of chapters, and we'd come back, and we'd have meetings, and we talked through it. So it went over the course of some time. So you'll see some slides from that presentation, and in some future ones, you'll see a couple other slides that I've just pulled out of that. But it was a presentation on kind of happiness and motivation. So you'll see that over the next couple ones. But again, the idea of it is that there's an advantage to it. So one of the things I did is I found some quotes. These are all quotes about kind of being positive in success. Success is getting what you want. Happiness is wanting what you get. So again, just kind of thinking that through, something like that. Happiness is not something ready-made. It comes from your own actions, right? So you control your environment. So that's one of the things. Again, another email came in. That one will take longer. It's another slide deck, so that'll take longer than 2 minutes. So we won't stop to go this. Happiness lies in the joy of achievement and the thrill of creative effort. So again, just a lot of things. There's a lot of people that you can find that have some really positive things to say about happiness. So happiness is grounded in science, right? So if you go back to this pyramid that we talked about right in that beginning, happiness is based in the same science. So when he goes through his book, he talks about the Maslow hierarchy of needs, and happiness being up near the top. So esteem needs, right? So look at that, the second kind of thing, the psychological needs, esteem needs, prestige, and the feeling of accomplishment and happiness. That's all in that area. So there's a whole group of people, and they're called positive psychologists, who've actually done research in that area, right? So they've actually taken just that one little part of Maslow, and they've created, and these are the three big names in it, and Shawn Achors being kind of the newest out of them all. But it's interesting because they really are writing papers and writing books all along this whole thing about engagement and creating jobs and meaning and purpose, resilience, and mindfulness. There's a lot of mindfulness. You see a lot of mindfulness now. As a matter of fact, when I did this presentation, we actually took some time to learn a little bit about mindfulness, because I thought it was a kind of a really good thing of some time taking that time to think through either your day or your week or whichever it is, and putting some thought behind it, and just it makes a much more happier person. So again, positive psychology, taking one part of that Maslow hierarchy of needs and saying, okay, how can we build stuff right within that? So again, just some stuff that you might hear. From that, positive psychology became performance psychology, and you've actually, so the guy down the bottom, that's Michael Gervais. He does a podcast. You actually listen to it earlier this year already, but he has a great podcast. He works with the Seattle Seahawks and Pete Carroll. So him and Pete Carroll have kind of created this whole thing, and they're working on this performance psychology. So again, just train your mind like you train your body. So it's again positive psychology, and they always talk about breaking barriers. The barriers that you set for yourself. It's all in your mind. It's not actually a physical barrier. And this is the example they give. So the 4-minute mile. So Roger Bannister broke that 4-minute mile in 1950. Since 1950, so they had never broken a mile in less than 4 minutes. I ran this morning. I'm nowhere near a 4-minute mile, so I'm just amazed at that. But since then, there have been 488 Americans to break that mark. In 2001, Alan Webb became the first high school student to break that mark. As a matter of fact, he just qualified for the Olympics for next year. But that's an interesting thing. And then in 2017, Reed Brown, also from Texas, ran a 3:59:30, and he came in 30. It came in third. Excuse me. There have been 5 high schoolers since 2015 to break that mark. So once that mental break has happened, people have been able to do it. So there's a whole thought on that. And again, it all stems back up to that positive psychology, and back in, if you follow it even farther back, it goes back into kind of what we've been talking about from Greenleaf. So going back to his presentation, just kind of thinking about the 7 principles. He has 7 principles. I'm not going to go into all of them, but it's just kind of interesting that each one of these principles, similar to what we're doing in the leadership challenge, there's some stuff that you can think about. I've just picked out a couple that I thought were interesting. So principle number 1 is just, what is that happiness advantage? When people are happy, how does that turn? And research shows that unhappy people take more sick days than happy people. Right? So if you like what you're doing, you tend to show up for work. So if you're the person who's creating the environment, you want to create a positive environment, not a negative environment. So that being said, the next thing is just as important to what you say is how you say it. So it's interesting. I had a manager years back when I first became a salesperson, and he was horrible, very much a toxic leader, just one of the meanest, nastiest people I've ever met. But he had one thing that stuck with me today. So as I said, sometimes you take things even from people you don't like, or books that you don't like, or whichever, and you can put them in your toolkit. But what he used to say is, it's not what you say, it's what people hear. So it really is something that I try to live by. And it's interesting because I was giving feedback to another manager on Friday. We had a region, an area-wide meeting. We had like 300 sales reps on. There was another manager giving a presentation, and afterwards he reached out to me and said, hey, so what did you think about it? And I had to give him some negative feedback, right? Because it wasn't great. So I had to think through how I could do it. I don't believe in the sandwich, something good, here's what I really thought, something good. Again, I don't believe in that. I believe in, you find good and you bad. But we went back to this quote, and I was saying, hey, when you said this, what did you mean? And he explained it. And then I said, when you said this, what did you mean? And he explained it again. And we did this like 4 or 5 times. And I said, so then I said, do you understand what I'm trying to get at? Is it's taking me 4 or 5 times to have you explain to me what you really meant to say. So it wasn't what you were saying, it was what we were all hearing. And again, it wasn't just my feedback, it was feedback that I had actually collected from some other people who were texting me through the entire time, not understanding what he was saying. So it was just one of those things of just giving him some feedback. So so my feedback to him was, you had great ideas and you had everything there. I think a little bit more rehearsal, maybe having a small group first that you said this to and tried to get what they were feeling before you kind of went out there. And then you, instead of just throwing it up in front of everybody, you tended to wander a little bit. And when somebody is especially on a Zoom call or a virtual call, and they're wandering, we're losing them. So you have to be much more succinct on those sort of calls. So that's what we were talking about. And I think it's an important thing to remember, right? It's not what you say, it's what people are hearing. So then the last thing is, 3 positive comments for every negative one. Like I just said, I don't like the sandwich, so I don't utilize it. But what I do is I do try to think through as I'm talking to different members of my team. And sometimes I'm giving positive feedback, sometimes I'm giving them negative feedback. It's just the way things go. Am I giving a lot of negative in a row, right? So sometimes if I feel like I've been really hammering somebody to give them a lot of negative feedback, I stop. I don't give the feedback, right? I might just call and just have a discussion with them. And if they bring it up, we might get there. But a lot of times I just want to have a talk with them. I just want to discuss with them because it becomes a much more positive experience than it does the negative one. That and sometimes, and people know when they're disappointing, right? Especially when you set the standards and you know what people are doing and they know that you can do it. How do we set those standards? It's one of those kind of interesting things. So the other principle was following up, right? So that he talks about. So this is an interesting one. So what can you learn from failure? Remember, again, going back to Stanley McChrystal. So the first TED Talk that we watched. How can you fail without being a failure? Was one of the things that he talked about. And this is the same thing. So these are 3 classic examples Michael Jordan cut from his high school basketball team. Right, Walt Disney fired from a newspaper for not being creative enough, and the Beatles turned away from a record executive because he felt guitar bands were on their way out. So again, going back to our leadership triangle, environment, right? So the environment of that high school basketball team wasn't right for Michael Jordan, but once he got to college and got to the pros, he was the greatest basketball player that ever played. Walt Disney fired for not being creative enough. I mean, he's a super creative person, but the environment that he was in was not conducive to that. And then the Beatles turned away from, because they didn't think guitar bands. So whose fault was that, right? Was that the just the general environment's fault? Was that the environment that the leader was setting for his followers? And that's what this kind of falling up gets into is, as a leader, what environment? So if you have somebody who's failing, are they failing because of the environment that you're creating? Or is it something that just the environment in general? So you've got to distinguish that. And that's something, again, as leaders now, in modeling the way and kind of, thinking through that sort of stuff, I need you to think through, like, is that why they're failing? Is it something that I can do? Or if you're a follower in an environment that's not working for another member of the team or the whole team, what can you do to affect that environment, right? So that as a follower, if you affect the environment, those 2 things can help the leader lead better. So it's just kind of thinking that sort of stuff through, and that's what he talks about in that principle. And then the last video that I have you watching this week is Amy Cuddy, and she's a psychologist. She's a psychiatrist. She's a PhD who's working on body language. So she does a lot on kind of looking at the way different body languages, and that's what the graph on the left-hand side of your screen is. It's showing different body languages and what do they emote to the people who are. So think through, if you were talking to each one of these people, how you would feel. And she talks a lot about power posing and things like that. Think Wonder Woman or Captain America. Those are power posing. And I think this is really good. And so that was in her first book, and then she just wrote another book called Presence. So again, taking some stuff out of it. So again, hopefully you guys got a lot. I know this was kind of a lot of, it's kind of a hodgepodge, but as we've built the concepts, we're now kind of sitting there. Again, I'm trying to find things to help you refine where you want to go with your leadership styles. So kind of, again, take some of the things that you've learned from each one of those and put it together. And again, if there's anything that you want me to go more in depth that you've read or don't understand or listen to, and you just like a little bit more clarification, please put it in the comment on Sakai, because I have no problem going deeper into any of the subjects. So again, thank you. Hopefully you guys are having a good week, and I will talk to you all soon.